Welcome to the podcast of Data and Analytics in Business. We will learn from the leading industry experts using data and analytics to solve the problems and create values in practice. We will also learn where the industry is heading to and how data and analytics will shape the industry in the future. Most importantly, how they are preparing their business for digital transformation and disruption in the future. I'm your host, Jason Tan, and thank you for listening. The role of the CFO within mid-sized scale-up business is critical to success. The demands on them can be significant and intense, but they are also an essential part in ensuring that growth happens smoothly for your company. Understand what you need from someone with this qualification will set everyone else on their toes. Make sure not to miss out by finding somebody who get it done like yourself. Now, to hear all this, we have Sigal Pilli to share why and how to unite finance and all sides of the business with data and analytics. Sigal Pilli is the Chief Financial Officer of Seer Medical. The company developed equipment for extremely accurate epilepsy diagnosis that can be done from the comfort of patients' home. Founded in 2017 with a vision to simplify complex medical system into technology that people can benefit from in the comfort of their own home. The company has enjoyed exponential growth and is now looking to expand into UK and US market. Sigal and I started the interview by talking about her volunteering experience and why she chose those organizations to volunteer for. Going deeper into the topic, we talk about how to avoid biases in hiring and managing female employees, especially for the STEM and tech industry. I asked Sigal for her thoughts and experience in using data analytics in the area of her work. She shared that to make the most impact organization with data analytics within her department is to focus on the revenue. And that is why finance is best suited for this work and how the overall organization, including pricing, products, and marketing department, can work with their finance team to make a sound decision that is forward-looking with a long-term view. We also spoke about organizing the finance department to work well with other departments in the organization. For finance leader, it means leading by demonstrating value and shining a light on points not considered by marketing and product to create a sense of confidence in the organization. If you are a CFO and always intrigued about how you can move beyond financial controlling but modernize your department to play a bigger role in your organization with your finance expertise, I would highly recommend listening to Sigal and how she plays her role in scaling and growing a company. If you have any question for Sigal or myself, make sure you send us an email or message on LinkedIn. Now, this episode is sponsored by us at the Analytics Show podcast. Wherever you are listening, follow the link in the description to join our first ever giveaway to win 1,000 Dogecoin. No risk, no anxiety, no worries. Just enter, share, and stand a chance to win the ever-growing coin. It is a perfect way to start your journey into the crypto without fear, and we'll follow Elon to the moon. Last but not least, make sure you click the subscribe button before the interview starts, so you will be the first to be informed on the latest episode on how business leaders run a high-performance organization using data analytics. I am your host, Jason Tan, and thank you for listening. Hello, Sigal. Welcome to the Analytics Show podcast. I'm so excited to have you here and chat with me today and share some of your experience. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Well, the pleasure is mine. Now, let's get things started. Now, from my research, I have found that you are involved quite a bit of volunteering initiative, like the IAPA is the Institute of Analytic Professional of Australia, CPA Australia, and also VIC ICT for Women. Could you share some of your volunteering experience and the driving force joining these volunteering opportunities?
Sure. So I've joined IAPA, the Institute of Analytics Professional, maybe 4 years ago. They approached me, and I strongly believe that businesses will benefit from making decisions which are based on data. We all have our biases, the one we know and the one we don't know about, and was always trying to promote data-driven decision culture. And this is what IAPA are trying to do. And I studied economics in university. In the first class, they tell you, assume people are rational and they want to maximize profit. Yet if you follow the work of Dan Ariely and other behavioral economics, you know it's very far from reality. And for me, initially, I consider myself to be very rational. And for me, it was a surprise at the beginning to realize how irrational we all are. So that's what I joined. I left recently because I felt I was stretched too thin and I couldn't fulfill my commitment. But I still think they're doing a fantastic job, and I still committed to the idea. About a year ago, I've joined Vic ICT for Women. After spending a decade with Envato and Assembly Payments and other tech companies, I can see how challenging it is for female in the tech sector. I could see female and male treated differently while displaying the same behavior. My daughter is 20, and I see her girlfriends hesitate going to STEM because they're worried about the work culture. And I also come from Israel, where tech is very strong, and I see the high participation rate of women in the workforce in general and in tech specifically. So I do believe it can be done differently. I do believe the change is coming. And this is exactly the mission of Vic ICT for Women, to help this change to come faster. And then lastly, CPI Australia, mentoring mid-level career person, female, for the second year. She actually asked me to do it for the second year in a row. I benefited from having mentors. Sometimes a small advice can make a big change to people's career. Yeah, and I just felt it's the right thing to do.
I really like what you have just shared with me about the Vic ICT for Women, and also how women are treated differently in the ICT or STEM ICT workforce. Now, you mentioned that it can be done differently, drawing from the experience and also what you have seen in Israel. Could you share a little bit more on that? How perhaps people can do? How can we improve that? Or maybe a word of advice for employer, people like myself, when we have the woman engineer on board. I do have quite a few. I don't feel I'm treating them differently, but I never know until maybe someone tells me something.
I think there are two levels. First of all, the general public level. And I think that should start in kinder, in school. Like, we don't have segregated schools for boys and girls separately. Girls go to the army in Israel. So you are raised up to think that you can do whatever any other man can do. Now, Israel is not perfect by any means. Like, there is a long way to go there as well. In terms of advice to employers, be aware of your biases and try to actively remove the things that can create them. With that, I mean, for example, when you do hiring, maybe you don't need to have the name on the CV. Be aware of the fact that women don't negotiate as hard. Be aware of the fact that female don't apply when they don't meet all the criteria, where men will apply even when they meet 50% of the criteria. Ask yourself the question, like, there is no magic solution, but it's just awareness will take a long way. Ask yourself the hard question when you are doing performance review, when there are 360 and people say about a woman that she is difficult or she is hard to work with. Is it because it's really the case? Or is it because we're judging her differently? I remember clearly sitting in a room where two people were arguing, a female and a male. He was much more obnoxious than she was. We left the room and the feeling was that she is very difficult. And that kind of made a switch in my head. I didn't realize that existed when I came here. I didn't realize it was an issue. So, yeah, I don't know. Not very smart advice, but that's what I can offer.
I think that is still a lot of gold nugget in there. I think it's more about how to not create some of those bias and also looking at the process. I feel like I can draw from my own experience from there. in some way that I suspect that I'm creating some certain bias. And what I mean by that is, as I'm trying to recruit, and as a small business owner, I have to deal with all sort of things, and I sometimes will spread myself thin. So in order to avoid to read few hundred resume and then try to determine another 50 people who is suitable for interview, and then finally interviewing 10 or 20 people, those are time consuming. So I design my recruitment process in a way that it will automatically filter out the people. And those process tend to get to see whether people are taking the initiative or not, people are putting in the effort to trying to understand, and whether people are having the attention to the detail to find out where the things are instead of me telling where they are, and then they will actually allow me to filter those things through. What is interesting is I felt that it seemed to attract certain people who are having more attention to the detail. And to some extent, I think female tend to have a lot more attention to the detail. And it kind of like got me to think there is level of bias in there that is sort of like creating that situation. I'm very happy with all the female team members that I have got, but I just want to use the example to point out that's how we could create this sort of bias unknowingly.
Yeah, it can happen. Look, research shows that there is absolutely no difference in the brain between female and male. Absolutely no difference. So if there is a difference in the attention to level, which I don't know, between men and women, if there is I don't know if there was a research done about it, but if there is a difference, it's probably a result of education or how they've been brought up, or just a coincidence coming from the few people that you hired, We're talking about data and analytics and big numbers and all that. And if it's just few anecdotes, I'm not sure it's enough.
I totally agree. Now, let's move to the main topic of the podcast interview today. Now, before I start, I understand you have recently joined a new company, Seer Medical. So what attracted you to decide in joining this new company?
So Seer is a value-driven organization that is focused on improving patients' life. As you know, maybe I should start with a bit of background about Seer for the audience. They might not know. So Seer was founded in 2016, and they focus on improving patients' life started from the area of epilepsy and expanding to cardiac and sleep as well. They developed equipment and a software machine learning algorithm to improve the diagnosis and the treatment of epilepsy patients. 30% of epilepsy patients are misdiagnosed and mistreated. In the past, if you needed to go through an EEG, you would go to the hospital, you'll stay there for a week with all these electrodes connected to your head. Very uncomfortable, not in your natural environment, and will take up to 20, 21 hours to read the results of this analysis, and until you have a bed available and all that. Here, what Seer does is that you take this equipment to your home. There is a camera also looking at you, so it improves also the insight that you get when reading that. Because it's machine learning, it's much more accurate. I know we all think that we are better than the machine, but that's not the case. So machine learning, and because it's a machine, it's doing it much faster, and it saves 95% of the time, and it's much more accurate. So it's a no-brainer, right? You want to work for a purpose-driven company, value-driven company. Everyone I met so far is super smart, super nice. They are in a growth stage. They are expanding to the US and the UK now, which is always very interesting. So they already have CE approval and in the process of getting FDA approval. So growth phase are always very interesting. And I never did medtech before or health tech. So it's also a learning opportunity. So for me, it was a golden opportunity to, from one hand, add value from my past experience with growing businesses. And from the other hand, work for a value-driven organization, which is an interesting point in its life and super nice people.
I love it. I would have to come back and check in with you at some point in the future about the growth face the growth of the Seer Medical in UK and US. Now, I want to ask you a little bit more about your role as the CFO at Seer Medical. Share with us what will you be doing there?
Sure. So we're talking before I started, like we're having this interview before I started. The official remit of the role is looking after finance and legal, which to a large degree depends on this type of company that grow fast. The role of the CFO changed with it. So when I started at Envato, I was only looking after finance. When I finished, I was looking after finance and analytic and fraud and M&A and tax and what's not. So the role evolved, and I'm expecting that the role will evolve as well. As I said before, the company is in an expansion point, and my role is to be an enabler. So I need to make sure that the back of house function will not hamstring the business, will not slow down the operation of the business, whatever it means. The other thing is that I think finance has, in any company, a very important role to be part of strategy discussion and provide insight that can help the strategy discussion and the decisions that are being made.
Now, the question I have for you next one is, as a CFO or COO at multiple leading organizations, I feel like your role naturally included a wide range of business functionality. So my question then is, what are the major areas of business and finance where you have found the most impactful use of data and analytics?
I think the first one that comes to mind is revenue. Look, the short answer is everywhere. But if I want to be specific, I think the first that comes to mind is revenue. Especially for online businesses, there is humongous amount of data. And in order to get insight out of this data, you need data and analytics. And then they can provide insight on your churn, on your ad spend, on the conversion funnel, on the demand curve elasticity. So many decisions can be benefited from doing an analysis which is based on data. Australian business want to go international. So you have an application in Australia, you have good penetration, you want to go international. How do you test the water? How do you know that you're making the right decision as you progress along? Will it be beneficial or will it not be beneficial? So obviously all this is benefiting from data and analytics analysis. In the past, the responsibility on providing financial analysis was with finance. Today, because of the amounts of data, it sits with data and analytics. But in a sense, it goes hand in hand. It's a financial information that helps to make decisions in order to improve the business. And it doesn't matter if it comes from the P&L or if it comes from your data scientists. And then all this insight about all these stages of revenue, or all the critical stages in order to convert customers and all that, then should come into account in your investment decision. Employees are the most expensive cost in a lot of the tech companies, and how to deploy them. And there is never a shortage of ideas. So how do you make the decision which idea to invest in without actually testing the water, getting some analytics done and progressing? So investment is a big part of that. And then the less sexy part of data and analytics is the data integrity. So if in the past, everything set in the ERP, all your data was in the ERP, it was very easy, right? Like you would issue an invoice from your ERP, you would get an invoice from supplier, everything sits in the ERP. Today, it sits in proprietary systems written by not finance professionals sometimes. So if you think about a marketplace, all the buyers, all the sellers, all the statements, all the transactions. And then the volume of the data is also very difficult to hold in the ERP. So often it will be held in the different data storage facility, whatever, data warehouse, data lake, whatever it is. And finance, I found in all my roles that finance and the people that take care of this data should be best friends because we are big customers. We are the customers of this data. We have a responsibility to make sure there is data integrity, but we rely on the service that we get from data and analytics to provide it in a way that we can consume it.
I think the data integrity is so important in a way that it should reconcile with the ledger as well. I think there are some places that I've seen that people are paying the attention to the data integrity more from the data or IT perspective rather than the finance or the accounting perspective, which means they never really reconcile to the general manager, but rather it's more about, is it normalized, demoralized, all those sort of thing. So I think that is important to highlight that. The other one that I just want to highlight that you hit so right on the nail is the revenue, the customer conversion, and the churn analysis, all the sort of thing, because I really think that I finally came to admit I was once on the other side of the boat, or the fence as well. But I have to admit that it's not necessarily the best product winning the market. I was an engineer, so engineer like to think that the best product winning the market. The reality is actually the one who have got the distribution strategy that win the market. So revenue is really the leading indicator of all that. So I suppose the question I have for you as a CFO is, how closely do you think the CFO should be working with the product and the marketing teams to ensure they are focusing on the things that matter the most? And maybe also, what should be the appropriate structure of these working arrangements?
So just to pick on your point about the distribution and the importance and all that, there was a study done about most startups don't succeed, unfortunately.
Yes.
I think the statistic is 80% or 90% or something like that are failed.
Can I just say that I did contribute to that 80 or 90% before?
Oh. I don't know. They say there is no failure, just learning opportunities. So you learn from that, I'm sure. And I think the research I heard is that the most common reason is not funding. It's not the idea, it's the execution. And I think this connects to what we discussed before about where analytics can help make the business better, because when you make decisions based on data, you're more likely to make better decisions, and then the execution going to be better. In terms of what's the role of the CFO, or how do they work with product and all that, I think the work should be very closely. I used to work very closely with the product team. And I think, look, for decisions to be made well, they need to be based on data, and you need to have diversity around the table. And finance missing out on this discussion means that something is lacking in the discussion. And finance will often bring the discipline to the discussion, the long-term thinking, the trades-off consideration, thinking about risk, thinking about compliance, things which most product people or marketing people, without making enemies, will miss or will not focus on. And naturally so, that's not the role. There is a reason why they are in marketing and why we are in finance. Everyone has their own role on how they look on things. So for me, the work should be done, it should be performed very closely. It can't be done in segregation.
I wanted to say revenue comes hand in hand with pricing, and pricing is important. Everyone like to say we don't want to be the cheapest, and it's not the consideration. It should be the consideration. But price is always an important factor when people are buying. My question for you then is, what role can the CFO team play in pricing, especially in the growth phase of the company where they don't necessarily have their own dedicated pricing analytic team?
It depends on the situation, of course. But in a sense, I see CFO role in relation to pricing similar to their role in relation to revenue. Providing the rigor, providing the long-term thinking, the trade-offs, not pushing too early for revenue sometimes, or not waiting too late with it. So sometimes you want to roll out a product for free until you start converting customers, knowing, or at least raising the discussion and having the discussion with the business around when is the right time to start monetizing, when is the right time to convert from free service to a paid service, is definitely something that I see the CFO part of. Pricing is a tool, basically. It's a tool and you need to find the sweet spot between the too low price and the too high price. And it's sometimes art more than science, especially if it's a product that was not in the market before, and it's very hard to compare to something else. It's not like you're selling Adidas shoes and Nike shoes. There is something to compare to, but it's if it's a virtual product or a service, it's sometimes very hard to quantify. And there is a lot of trials and error. That applying rigor to this trial and error is also something I think CFOs should be part of the discussion. And then there are other considerations. So is that local? I mean, is it internationally unified pricing, or is it local prices? Is it physical items or is it digital items? Are we talking about, this is in the context of a marketplace, of course. Who is setting the prices? Is it the platform or is it the sellers? Are there any legal consideration with setting the prices? So pricing is quite a complex area. And like every other complex area, I think CFO should be involved.
I can imagine having done lots of pricing analytics. And I think one of the things that I am working on, and also it got me to think a lot about, is the pricing in the software as a subscription business. As much as we all like the beauty of the software as a subscription business because of that recurring revenue, I think like you say, how do we find that perfect line where it is not too high, it is not too low, is more an art rather than science. I myself found that I think it's important to recognize where exactly we want to be in the position, where exactly we want to be positioned in the market. Am I selling Ferrari or Lamborghini, or am I actually selling a Toyota? That is probably one. But then the most interesting one, I think, for me is also about finding that line of the price where people are comfortable to continue to subscribe, even though they are not using it. I know it sounds wrong.
No, it's not wrong at all. A lot of the subscription services, numbers change, depends on where you read, but somewhere between 30 to 40% are paying and not using on a single month. If it was very expensive, they wouldn't have been lazy to unsubscribe, or they wouldn't have been forgetting that, right? So it's from one hand, you want it to be affordable enough so people don't bother to subscribe and unsubscribe every month. Oh, I'm going to be overseas, so I better cancel my Netflix subscription or something. Most people don't do that because it's $15. So what?
Yes, I know that I am one of them. I subscribe to Spotify, but I know I'm actually not using it enough. And there are months I actually don't even touch it, and yet I'm still paying. It's just a beauty of the subscription business. Funny enough, one of the advice that I have been given is for the business subscription product, you want to understand how much people are paying for their mobile phone plan. And it shouldn't be higher than that.
Interesting.
Because the reason and the justification of that suggestion is that when it comes to a decision-making time where people have to make sacrifice, you want them to decide, are they going to drop their mobile phone plan or are they going to drop your subscription? Because things are tight, pockets are tight. Obviously, no one is going to drop their mobile phone plan. I thought that is a pretty solid advice, though, to think about that way. If we want to achieve a comfortable line where people are still subscribing when they are not using it.
I think there is, if you are interested in pricing, I think, again, Dan Ariely and the others have a lot of work around that, about anchoring a price. If there is someone in the market, or if you've just read before about something expensive, there is a lot of, or when you give people 3 options, and I think there is a famous one done with a subscription to The Economist, where people were offered subscription to, I need to remember this one. There was subscription to the paper magazine you get, subscription to the online one, a subscription to both of them. So the subscription to both of them was the same price as the online only, and still people were opting for the online, which was, why wouldn't you also get the printed one? And this is, you can say from one hand, oh, people are worried about the environment and they didn't want to print it. But I think it was more the way the offer was made, which made people choose the one which is theoretically less beneficial or less. And yeah, there's quite a bit of work done around it and a lot of research around what are people, how do they rate things that they are involved in building versus things that they get ready. So when you build a Lego, it's suddenly worth to you much more than if you get it ready made and things like that. I think it's fascinating.
I think that magazine example is a perfect illustration and example of how people are irrational.
Exactly, completely. All of his books, and I keep talking about him because that's the name I remember, but there are quite a few of them, Kahneman and others, which are really interesting. I encourage everybody to read them.
I totally agree. Sometimes it comes down to how we frame the whole thing. Framing thing from the angle B versus the angle A versus the angle C sometimes could make a huge difference, even though what it tried to achieve is exactly the same. And I think that's the important thing for the data scientists to understand, that data tells us things, but how you frame it is a different story.
Yeah. And that's where the art comes in, right? Or the commercial understanding comes in. And sometimes it's more challenging than the actual data.
Totally. Now, speaking of this commercial experience and also your experience working within the financial operation and drawing what we have just discussed, i.e. working with the product team, pricing team, and the marketing team, my question for you is, how would you describe the most productive or fruitful relationship of the finance team should be with all of these other function and the department of the company?
Finance has a challenging role in a sense, I think. From one hand, we are enablers. We should be kind of the bulldozer that open the road for the business to set foot internationally or to do things. But on the other hand, the traditional role of finance is looking after risk and compliance and these sorts of things, which are not really in controls. And these things are not really considered as enablers. No one likes controls. If you think about the title financial controller, no one likes that, but that's part of the mandate. And I think the art is to find the sweet spot between having enough processes so there wouldn't be chaos, because chaos slows down businesses and people don't feel safe, but not too many processes such that people don't, so it doesn't stifle the business, that people, it doesn't kill creativity, it doesn't kill, again, moving fast. And it's a trial and error. Every business is different. Every culture is different. And I found that things that work in business A don't necessarily work in business B, and you need to do the fine tuning to adjust to that. Same goes for information flow. So the traditional role of finance was to provide information to the business. Someone will key in the data, you get your P&L, you get your cash flow, you send it at the end of the month to management and to the board. You add maybe some commentary about the variances, and that's it. The role of finance was done. I think today it's much different. It should be much different. I think the data should be two-way street. If finance doesn't understand the business, doesn't understand the risk, doesn't understand the constraint, they can't ask the difficult questions. They can't challenge the business. They can't understand the numbers in a way that will really add insight. And the reporting becomes very synthetic, in my opinion. The planning process, for example, is a good example of that. So clearly, finance is the owner of the planning process, the budget, the forecast, but it's not the owner of the budget and the forecast. The owner of the budget and the forecast should be the CEO, the GMs, the business owners. Finance role is to ask their difficult questions, is to challenge the assumptions, and they can't do that without understanding. If you don't understand what the business is, where the business is going, what is the strategy, what are the challenges, if it's a marketplace, what do the author feel, how do the buyer behave? If it's a subscription service, how do the consumers see this service? Then you can't actually ask the right questions, and you're there just as a machine taking data and translating it into Excel, and you're not adding any value in a sense.
One thing that I just pick up is, even for finance, and this is something that I always said to the data scientist or the data guy, is that you got to understand the business. You got to understand what the business is trying to achieve. that is what we are here for in order to make the things happen. It's not just about moving the data. It's not just about building the model, because if we just move the data, build a model that doesn't do anything or achieve the business objective, then why are we even doing it?
Exactly. And then you look at the data, let's say you look at the data and you see a trend, but you don't know if you really see a trend because it's disconnected from what's happening in the business. And that's why the best analytics people, the best finance people are those that are both strong technically, but also strong commercially.
Exactly, on point. Now, coming back to the question I had early with you, I want to dwell a little bit deeper on that. My question is, as you were explaining how to create that fruitful relationship for the finance team with all other functions, for other organizations, if they have issue, my question for you is, how can they identify the issue or problem that are hindering them from achieving such a smoother functioning among all the departments?
So I just want to make sure I understand the question. So you're asking, when finance people or analytics people find it difficult, find the work with other departments difficult, what can they do to improve that? Is that what you're asking?
No, sorry.
No.
I think my question is more of, how can organization identify the issue or problem that hindering them to get all the teams coming together and work as a team? How do they work with each other smoothly? I think this is more for your experience from working in the management for all these years.
Look, I think different companies probably will have different reasons for that to happen. Sometimes it can be lack of alignment in terms of the goals and the KPIs of the business. At some point, at one of the organizations, we started to set goals. And I was of your view of, I don't need goals. I know what I need to do this year. And after this process, I actually felt that the process of setting the goals was even more important than the specific goals that were set, because the discussion brought up the conflicts, the priorities, the constraints, and helped the different departments to land on a mutually agreed priority list that can then drive the business to the same direction. I think the other thing which is very important is culture. When there is a culture that shut down people that raise concerns, they wouldn't feel safe to come forward. And I strongly believe that the wisdom of the crowd or the wisdom of the large number of employees is much bigger than the wisdom of a few executives. And they are closer. They will be able to alert to issues much earlier than by the time they come up in the numbers or by the time they filter up in the chain of command. You know, as much as I can use this word change of command, but that's what I meant, you know, until. So I think having a very safe environment for people to raise concern, having a flat organization with not a lot of hierarchy will enable people to come forward when they have concerns about things. And the last thing is maybe thinking about, so companies use KPIs in order to measure performance or to motivate teams. I don't like the use of KPI this way. I think it can foster the wrong behaviors. If you want to have KPIs, they need to be very smart. They need to be measuring, contradicting things. So quality and quantity, not only one of them. But one of the things that KPIs can be helpful is if you know the leading indicators in your business and you measure them, you get ahead of the crisis in a sense, or you're ready when things happen. So if you know your revenue are connected to the number of buyers you acquire, or if you know that your revenue are connected to the number of items you're selling, and you measure the number of items or the numbers of purchase orders or the numbers of new sellers, it can tell you, oh, in 3-4 months' time, I might have a problem with my revenue. And then you can do something about it and not wait until you see the decline in revenue to start to do it. And the analysis, why did this happen? Did I answer the question?
Yes, you did. And especially I love the use of the leading indicator I think that is so important because sometimes if we are focused way too much on just the P&L or revenue, and the problem with those is that they tend to be lagging a little bit, and by the time they realize it is a problem, is probably a little bit too late to take action. So I really like that leading indicator. That is one thing that I'm trying to do more for my own business. I hope I'm hitting the right leading indicator. Now, I think it's important to look at the big picture. What is the root of the problem? That is probably the way that I use to find it.
And also use the data to find the correlation. So, and when you have enough track record, you can go back and look at the correlation. The revenue are connected to that factor and that factor. So this is probably my leading indicators.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think we should talk more about that one sometime. My next question for you is, how can CFO perhaps play a role to inspire the board or the CEO to involve and integrate the finance team in all sides of the business?
I think it's when you've proven that finance can add value to the discussion. Basically, board and CEOs want always to improve performance. And if you can show that your insight, your work, your comments can improve the performance, that you can do your work better in protecting the assets of the business, in protecting the business by being involved in things, then it's a no-brainer. They will want to involve you. So I think to a degree, it's our responsibility to show what we can bring. On the other hand, I think it's also the responsibility of CEOs and board to be informed enough to know what's the potential in finance, and then to challenge their finance departments to provide them what theoretically they could do, or what they read somewhere that they can do, in a sense. Does this make sense?
Yes. Final question before the last two. What is your word of advice for the CFO in the mid-sized company and growth phases to play a role using analytics, to play a role using the finance field to help the company growing?
For me, understand the business. You have to understand the business. You have to speak to different parts of the business, commercial, product, tech, legal, all facets of the business, so you can have a picture in your head. I often say that finance sits in the middle of an intersection, and they can see all the traffic coming from right, from left, from this side, from that side. And they have a unique, both finance and data analytics, by the way, is a unique position where they see all this information. Where some parts of the business only see their own, finance has the ability to see everything. And because they can see everything, they have the ability to join the dots and form a picture. So use that. My advice to you is use this opportunity, ask a lot of questions, don't be shy. Most of the time, if you ask something and you're afraid that you might look stupid, there are other people wanting to ask the same thing and they don't ask. So just ask the question, make yourself informed, and make yourself heard.
I want to delve a little bit deeper about what you have just discussed, because what I love about it is that you constantly talk about the understanding of the business, even though as a finance person, and also understanding all different aspects of the business. Now, if I were to apply myself in the similar analogy, I often explain that even though we are data analytic, we need to understand how the ERP system is working. We need to understand the business. We need to understand how people extract the data to build the data warehouse, because they will change how the data behavior. And then finally, it is about understanding how the user, the customer is transforming and making the data behavior, and how we can finally tie all of those different things together in order to build a data science platform. Now, the problem with that, though, the problem that I sometimes face, or the criticism that I would hear, is that, well, in that case, you are finding a unicorn who can understand everything. My counter argument is, it shouldn't be difficult to understand everything. I mean, I'm not trying to ask a person to be an expert of it, but You can't just say, I am in data science. I don't care how the ERP system working.
I don't think it's a unicorn. I think it's possible. I know that some big businesses started to bring translators, which sits between analytics and the business and kind of put the two heads. They understand enough about analytics and they understand enough about the business to be able to kind of negotiate, bridge between them. I think it's a matter of understanding the importance. If you understand as an analytics person, as a finance person, you understand that in order to do your job better, you need to understand, I don't know, our product offering. You need to understand what our customer support are doing, whatever it is. Then it's just part of your role and you can learn it. You learn much more difficult things. I think learn analytics and statistics is much more difficult than understanding the business. It's just a decision that needs to be made that you actually want to do it and that the business will give you the opportunity to do that. And it's about being curious. It's about asking the questions.
Correct. On that note about the data translator, you reminded me that one of the guests, Andy Sutton, he's the general manager at the Envato Drinks Group. He did mention that one of the things that he saw in UK environment, but haven't seen that much in Australia because he come from UK, is that the role of analytic translator, the person who sit in between those two jobs. So I think maybe we should have more of this sort of...
I know it started here in the big, large corporates. Yeah.
Right. So I it looks like I'm ahead of the time. Shamelessly shelf plug. So anyone who hear that, just hear that. Now, my two final usual question for you that I have for every single guest. First thing first, what is your most important first principle?
I don't believe in first principles. I think things change with time and situations. I can speak about the most common things. So I prefer to use facts and logic to solve problems. As we said before, we need sometimes to package them differently for different people and for different situations and present them differently. But I always prefer to rely on logic and rationale, even though we are all irrational. I think perseverance is really important, both in business and in personal life. The work of Simon Sinek really resonates with me about the infinite game. And, sometimes you're ahead, sometimes you're behind. That's life. And that goes for businesses as well. And it's about the long term. And I think values is probably the most important thing. If you don't have your own core values that you're not willing to give up on, then what's the point? Like, you're just moving with the wind. So 3 first principles.
What is one book that you have read and thought it would have been better for your younger self to have?
So I had to think a lot about this one. And I think Quiet from Susan Cain is a book that was recommended to me some 5 years ago, I think. And, in a word, that the louder you are, the more professional you are considered to be, or the better leader you are considered to be. And being an introvert and often being surrounded in data analytics and in finance, being surrounded by introverts, I think it was very refreshing and in a sense even validating, reading the research around introverts and extroverts and all that, and kind of A, explaining it in a very logical way, and B, giving a permission even. So, yeah.
I think on the risk of offending certain demographic, I think the world has shown us that the loud talker or the louder people, in fact, can make you the president of a country. Is one of those challenges that we see.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of problems over there, except from him being an extrovert. So I think there were some serious issues.
But I just want to say I can relate so much with this one. Like you say, in the world of finance and analytics, there is so many introverts. I myself is a total introvert. I would often rather put my head down just to do the things rather than being out there and speak. Is quite a bit of getting out of that comfort zone. But it's so important to recognize the one who is putting the head down and getting the things done. And when they speak with volume rather than just speak for the sake of speaking. So thank you so much for sharing that sentiment. I love it. I should check out the book. I should highly recommend that book to everyone as well. Thank you so much, Sigal, for sharing all of this about the finance team and how finance use data analytics and how you can work and unite the rest of the business team within the company. I have learned so much. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having me.